Welcome back to the podcast. This week, we're sharing one of my favourite episodes so far, part of our new series of recap episodes. While we're busy producing new content for the podcast, YouTube, and our brand new Patreon channel. That's right, Connect, Curate, Create is now on Patreon. It's a dedicated space to learn, share, and grow together. And here's why we built it. Do you feel like your art is being seen by the right people? Are you getting the kind of feedback that actually helps you grow? Do you have a space where you can learn with other artists who really get what you're doing? If you answered no to any of these questions, Connect, Curate, Create is here for you. Our Patreon community gets exclusive and early access to content, behind the scenes videos, key takeaways from episodes and events, access to live discussions with our guests, and so much more. So, if you're ready to grow your creative practice with the support of a collaborative learning community, click the Patreon link in the show notes and join us today. Now, let's get into another brilliant episode, packed with ideas and inspiration for your own creative journey.
And that's something that I am always considering in my own works is like, what is the limit of the vulnerability I'm willing to offer an audience? When you love what you do, it's really hard to just put it down. There is definitely a different pace here, and I love it.
In this very first episode, I talked with Zara Sully, Director of Sawtooth ARI in Launceston, Tasmania. Zara shares her own journey from discovering the school darkroom to running a successful arts organisation. They offer keen insights into making queer art, how they balance their arts practice with work, the important role that ARIs play, and why they love living and working in Lutruwita. Welcome, Zara.
Hey, Tim, it's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know we've had lots of conversations in the past about the arts and always enjoyed them. So I'm really looking forward to getting your perspective on careers in the arts, how your career's panned out and what you see for the future of it.
Ooh, that's the scary question always, isn't it? The future? Who knows?
Well, we might get to it, might not. Let's start at the beginning and see how we get to the end.
Sounds good.
So I suppose the first key question is tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your own arts practice? What's the artwork that you make? What do you do as an artist?
So as an artist, I'm your classic. I went through VCA, which is an art school in Naarm, Melbourne, where we are, well, at that university, it's very much conceptually focused, not a technically skill-focused college. So my work is very conceptually grounded in a few different avenues. I feel like when I was studying, it was really based in queerness and different avenues of queerness. I very much worked with what I called a drag methodology, where it wasn't necessarily me making art, it was a character of myself that creates. And I still very much kind of feel that through my creating, but it might not be art about queerness all the time, because I think it's quite queer that I'm putting on this little performance and making these silly little artworks all the time. Lately, my practice has been heavily painting based, meaning words that are painted and say something. Nothing more complex than that, sadly, because it's really hard tackling and balancing between working in the arts and also producing artworks themselves. And I think I found myself become a lot more critical of my own practice. And I used to be able to just make without an outcome. But now I'm really kind of in that awkward spot where I'm always thinking about outcome.
Okay.
So I haven't been making much, but I'm trying to unravel that and just learn to make without an outcome based.
Yeah, that's an interesting dilemma. It's so, do you find having that outcome in mind actually stops you doing the work? So, because what you're telling me is you by trying not to think of that should make you more productive. What's the relationship there?
I think my time is precious and I'm almost hypersensitive to that sometimes. And I get stuck with the idea of spending so much dedicated time on something creative. And I'm always, I have this artwork in mind, but I can't fully reason with what the conceptual backgrounding is of it. So then I just stop and don't do it because I haven't found that answer yet. And then trying to reconcile that will take time, maybe after making it, when, materials cost money at the end of the day. And one of the biggest holes in my artistic practice, like, yes, I do paintings at the moment, but I don't really consider that my art practice. That's me being creative and letting something out there. But my art practice has always landed me using very expensive materials and trying to justify to myself that I should spend a few $100s on the right casting silicone or on Perspex or on, it could be anything. I find it really hard to justify the cost without knowing why first.
Yeah.
And I think money always comes into it, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you've got a relationship with time and money, and we'll come back to that, I think.
Yeah.
There's some interesting questions I want to ask you about that, I think. But so text, I've always noticed this about your work.
Yeah.
So text is so important. Why text? What is it about? How do you work with text, and what, where does that come from?
I've always worked with text. Like, it's really been a strong theme from my practice from day dot. And I've always found text. My issue with art sometimes is that it can be a bit wishy-washy. Maybe not wishy-washy. But, you really ask your audience for a lot of their labour to understand your work. And that's cool and that's fine for artists who do that. But I think text gives you an immediate in on being able to unravel a work sometimes, or a relatability.
Yeah.
Obviously, it comes with its own issues that, if English isn't someone's first language, my work might not be overly accessible to them. But that's my audience at this current stage in time is, I don't know if I have an audience, but I would say my audience are mostly English speakers. And I like to give them a straight in and also relatability. I'm really passionate about relatability.
Right.
And being able to relate to art. And I think text that can be understood directly and clearly gives a easier in for relatability than maybe a painting of a sock.
Yeah.
Not that I could actually paint a sock, because that's too much technical skill.
Yeah, and the text the text that you are producing,
Yeah.
making, working with, for me, you're showing me something about yourself.
Yes.
So there'll be a piece of work, for example, that will talk about how you're feeling in a particular moment or a situation, something you're working through. Is that right? Or
Definitely. It's kind of like sudden moments, and my notes in my phone is full of different ideas for paintings, or just different quotes that I've either said or heard someone else say. That just suddenly I'm like, that would make a painting. That would make a good painting. And then I sometimes turn it into a painting. Friend of mine, artist Ollie Reed, put my text paintings into, I think it was a nice way to summarise them, maybe as a playful nihilism. So yeah, they're definitely really playful and colourful, but they're a bit dark underneath it all somewhere sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, in my own photographic practice, I do find myself photographing a lot of signage, and for me, very often it speaks to me in a way about how I am feeling in that moment or have felt before, and it's almost like documenting that to match it up to a state of being at some point in my life, and it's and then how that gets articulated out into the world. So yeah, it's through your painting, there's some graft in there, isn't there? I guess it's the work of putting that text onto a canvas, onto a surface, and then sharing that with the world.
Definitely.
Very brave.
It's pretty brave. I don't know. I think that's always been a big question within my own practice. So with the what we call queer art, there's this really intense pressure to be overtly vulnerable.
Yes.
And that's something that I am always considering in my own works is like, what is the limit of the vulnerability I'm willing to offer an audience? And like, maybe I should be more careful of that or less careful of that. I remember writing about it in my honours thesis and how, in my honours thesis, I wrote my thesis about the rubber duck as a symbol for queer childhood and me exploring, trying to like recover that part of myself, which sounds ridiculous, but we'll go with that. And I wrote about my friend's work, Jay Davies, who's a photographer, and their work really has such this like honest vulnerability to it. And I was kind of jealous that my art wasn't doing that because I kind of hide behind that performance. So kind of if you put everything on the table, they're not actually going to see really what they're looking at maybe.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Okay. So you're not as you referred to before, you're not putting necessarily your whole self out there, but you're portraying that your art portrays a character that you have created. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah.
I've got to have that little protection. It's like I don't work under my legal name. I'm really afraid of putting my ultimate self out there, whatever that means. Maybe I already am doing it and I don't realise. But I have this little protection of fear of giving away my entire self to a career per se.
Okay, we might come back to that. Because I do want to get back to, because the question I really want to ask you is sort of where does it all come from? But not necessarily, I don't want to delve deeper into that at this stage. But I do think that it's sort of, why art? What took you to VCA? Or did you just find yourself there? What is it about making art, being part of the arts, being really quite an important figure in the arts here in Tasmania particularly, and I'd say nationally, how did you get here?
Great question. I hope you're ready for a little monologue.
Please.
Because it's kind of a funny story how I found myself in the arts, but also not that funny and kind of obvious at the same time. So growing up, I loved photography. Always loved it. I was really fortunate that so when I was about 15, I moved schools. I went to 3 different high schools. And at the second high school I went to, there was a darkroom. And there's not many schools that still have darkrooms. Yes, it was black and white. And I loved it. I loved being in that kind of dark, mysterious space with all the chemicals because I really loved science as well. And I'd spend as much time as I could developing photos, and I don't even know what they were of anymore. They probably weren't fixed properly either, so I won't be able to ever see them again.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I really, really love photography. And I have a sister who's quite a bit younger than me. So she's 8 years younger than me. And so I used to take loads of photos of her as a child.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that was my favourite thing, was like taking photos of this little human being who was kind of part me, who's now like in her 20s, which is a bit scary. So really love photography. Then I moved from that middle high school to a different high school called Swinburne Senior Secondary College. And that was seen as an alternative high school. I suffered from mental illness like a lot of teenagers do. And I kind of hit a head, was like, I really can't do school anymore. I was one of those really high achievers who hit their burnout just a couple of years too early, I think.
Oh, wow.
And so I moved schools again to Swinburne. And it was an alternative school in a way that, so you got Wednesdays off. So you were only at school 4 days a week.
Yes.
It had a better darkroom than my old school. And it was really arts focused.
Brilliant. Through there, you got the trifecta there.
Got the trifecta there. And then the subjects I did were physics, maths again, English language, and studio art.
Oh, wow.
So at that stage of my life, I loved photography, but I was like, I can't do that. That's not an option for real life going ahead. I was maths focused and physics. So did that, finished high school. Sorry, it really is a monologue. Finished high school and then went to uni and started studying a double degree in arts and science. And I was majoring because I found out I could maybe do photography at uni through this arts degree at Deakin.
Right.
So I was majoring in photography and mathematical modelling. So like conceptual maths, basically.
Yeah.
Did like 2/3 of that degree and then failed a unit of mathematics and was like, yeah, why am I doing maths? I actually hate it. I'm not very good at it either. I just was told I was. And, you know, I knew that I could be a teacher and make a career out of that. And, you know, everyone loves their numbers. And I was really afraid of delving into the arts. I'd even applied to go to art school when I finished high school, but my interview was the same week as schoolies. So I chose to go to schoolies instead of try out for art school because I was like, you've got to do the numbers thing. I was like, it's clearly pushing me towards the numbers, but it wasn't. And then I applied for VCA. After I failed a maths unit, my other friend had failed her marketing unit and she was doing marketing at the time. And it was really funny because we were both these massively high achievers in high school and failing would have been like our worst nightmare and it came true. And I was like, yeah, I actually hate my degree. Like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I love photography though. So I went to art school, went to VCA, got in, was in the photography course and was like, I'm a photographer. That's what I am. I'm a photographer. And then I realised, oh, I'm an artist. Oopsies. VCA had a colour darkroom, which was why I chose it out of all the art schools. And then I went to the colour darkroom once, ripped a negative and never went back in. And
So just because, ripped a negative. Sorry,
Yeah.
You've just, I mean, so just that one thing, you just never went back in.
yeah,
So
never went back into the darkroom since then.
You chose to go digital photography, or
No, I use alternative ways of image making.
Yeah.
So a lot of my practice, if it's not text-based, it's based around the scanner. So I scan a lot of images and that's how I make it because that's how you get your highest quality of images through a scanner because you're working with more data that can be captured. So it's basically you're working with like a scanner size negative.
Yeah.
And like one of my artworks, I blew up a piece of glitter. Eventually I managed to blow it up to be about 40 to 50 centimetres wide was a piece of glitter. And I could do that because of the scanner and its abilities and its gain and loss of information through scanning and rescanning and layering.
Yeah, so I suppose the darkroom was that dark, mysterious place you described, but actually, there was a pivotal moment, you know, that I don't necessarily need to interrogate that.
Yeah.
As a photographer with a darkroom practice myself, I am interested, but for our audience, what you've described there about using a scanner, it's whatever technology you're using, whatever process you are working with, you're manipulating, you're working with materials to see how far you can push them, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, all about manipulating the audience.
Well, I was thinking of upstream to materials. Yeah, manipulate materials. Okay, so maybe we'll come back to
Maybe not the audience.
or maybe that's when you come back for series 2.
Yeah.
We'll interrogate manipulating audiences. So look, you talked about your relationship with time before, and the depth of your practice. I think we've got a good understanding of that.
Yeah.
So, as an artist, how does that intersect with your role as Director of Sawtooth ARI? And I suppose, before you answer that, the important question is, I guess you left VCA and then you need to work, you need to pay the rent, you need to live. So how did you get into working with arts organisations? Do you consider yourself an arts worker? And if so, what does that mean to you?
It's a great question. Before I'm anything, I'm an artist.
Yeah, good.
I think like that is what drives me, and me being an arts worker is part of my artistic practice, really. And for me, I started getting involved with ARIs whilst I was still in my undergraduate, actually. So I kind of jumped the gun. A lecturer said, volunteer at an ARI. You'll get some great experience. And I took it and I ran with it. I started volunteering at a small arts org in Dandenong in Victoria called Connection Art Space.
Yep.
And I was doing their media for a little bit and I loved it. It's like, this is kind of fun. And then I realised the audience wasn't me. And I was making stuff for an audience that wasn't myself. And so I stepped aside from that and I started volunteering at Bus Projects and Trocadero Art Space.
Okay.
Which is now Trocadero Projects, I think.
Okay.
And I loved it. You know, I volunteered at Bus, I think, for 5 years.
Oh, right.
Longer than my degrees put together. And I volunteered at Troc for about the same amount of time. And at Troc, I kind of worked my way up through the ranks and started off just as a volunteer sitting in the gallery and then landed myself as the vice chair. And really enjoyed actively participating in making work come to life in ways that you don't get just at an institution. And I think ARIs are... I'm sorry, I haven't answered your question at all because I've forgotten it. I'm dancing around it.
Because what's important for our audience who don't know is what are ARIs?
So ARIs are artist-run initiatives. Effectively, there are spaces for art run by artists for artists. Put as simply as you can. ARIs really differ on how they are run, who they are run by, who they are run for, I think is now becoming a really big question in ARIs. And a lot of ARIs are really trying to flip, not necessarily here in Lutruwita, but particularly I see this on the mainland. They're really trying to question, you know, who is this for? And trying to introduce different audiences through the way they curate and bring in people to their spaces. So effectively, you get to see art. You're not going to buy it necessarily. They might be for sale, but the purpose is to see this art and share emerging and experimental practices.
Yeah. And here we're sitting in Sawtooth, and we're in the middle of a queer takeover.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
So we're in the middle of a queer takeover. So I finally was like, I'm going to curate something. And so we have 3 shows that make up our queer takeover. So in the space, which is the first space you enter, it's like a little foyer gallery almost, we have Queer Open. So we kind of explored showing art in a different way, and we did an open call. And we said, if do you identify as a queer artist living in Lutruwita, submit your art. And that was all you had to do. We didn't curate from that selection. We just accepted every application we got. And I was confident we wouldn't get too much because we got the perfect amount. And then first space, we have a show called The Creature of the Black Lagoon. From the Black Lagoon, not sure exactly on the wordage there, by Piera Van Sparks and Elijah Money. And first space is not curated by myself, but I knew when we received the application from both these artists, a really important part of this exhibition they were proposing was queer black joy. And I was like, perfect. I can fit this in with something else. And then artist called Bo Palmer reached out during our application process 2 years ago, I think it was, and applied for a show. And it was about kind of bringing gender diverse and really queer artists from ACT over to Lutruwita and also introducing some artists from our island here. And Bo was going to be the curator of that show. And I thought about it and I was kind of like, not in a nasty way, I hope, but I thought, well, if I'm giving you the names of all these artists, I may as well co-curate the show.
Yeah, indeed.
Because I'm doing the work. As well as that lessons Bo now having to talk to 8 artists instead of 20 artists. And I know the capacities that Sawtooth has that Bo does not. So we worked on that for about 2 years, curated artists. And we worked quite differently. Like, you know, typically with queerness for Hot Mess is what the show's called. Typically when you do queer art, you're always trying to sanitize it and you try to put it into like a nice little neat pocket and an aspect of what queer art could be.
Yeah.
But what we tried to do is really not do that, because we're trying to embrace the messiness of queerness. And I know other orgs have issues with that. But, you know, we see the NGV did their big queer show, I think it was late last year or the year before that. Like, if a big giant org can use a framework of just queer, why can't a smaller org do the same?
No, indeed.
And I really wanted to challenge that idea. So that was kind of the premise we went to our artists with. So I reached out to artists who I knew were queer, some artists who don't necessarily always make work about queerness, but that was very much my pitch to them, was like, you know, reflecting on queerness and what that means to you, or however they wanted to explore that within their own practices, which was, you know, super exciting but tricky.
Well, and as you said before, you know, there's a brave, well, I think I inferred that from what you'd said at the start, is there's a bravery to a queer practice that about the performativity and the putting oneself out into the world and what you put out.
Definitely.
So the more open the brief, the more care there is in the curation.
That's what I think.
Yeah, right.
Marguerite Carson, who's one of the artists in the show, we were reading this article, and I'm not going to get into details, but it was kind of, you know, someone had been curated into a queer show and didn't feel safe because it was such a refined aspect of queerness that they were looking at. And it was interesting to read that post, my decisions of kind of not trying to polish up the concept of the show and just embracing it for what the artists wanted to do.
Yeah. So so ARI is generally a very safe space for emerging artists, non-commercial.
Yeah.
And Sawtooth, very much a safe space for queer emerging artists.
Yeah. We try to be, at least.
Yeah. Is this a strategic choice?
Not for Sawtooth, but maybe for myself.
Awesome.
I think it was a way that I could give myself more energy in my role in doing what I really love most, which is curating queer art practices.
Yeah.
That's really, at the end of the day, I come back and forth between what I love doing, and queer art is what I love the most. It's what I read about the most. It's what I talk about the most. And it was me able to, you know, bring that into my role here at Sawtooth. It gave me a new energy that I hadn't had for a little bit. I think I was kind of running dry a bit, but being like queer takeover, it showed me that my hard work has kind of paid off in a way in making it a safe space, or as best as we can. I kind of hate the phrase safe space, not to just because I don't think any space is ever truly safe, especially queer spaces.
Of course.
I think they can often end up being the most unsafe spaces because you expect them to be so safe.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that gives me something to think about.
Yeah, I can say that's a totally different tangent, but something that I do. I live in a very queer household. I live with two other queers, and we regularly are talking about, you know, creating queer spaces in Launceston and the trials and tribulations that come with that. And without going into information, because I don't want to.
No, of course not.
One of the big reasons why I actually left Melbourne was due to attempting to create a queer space. And it destroyed me so much that I was like, I have to leave this state.
Yeah, okay.
And that was why I came here. And then I did exactly what I tried to run away from, but in a different place.
Well, sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's situational. So yeah, maybe now is the time and this is the place.
Definitely.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm getting a strong energy from you around this. So
yeah,
I can tell how much you're loving it. So how long have you been at Sawtooth?
So in May, it will be 3 years.
Yeah.
So a year and 9 months. No, not a year. 2 years and 9 months, roughly.
Okay.
And yeah, I moved here. I applied for the role, and I knew the role was available because I actually had a show that I'd curated with my friend Brooke van der Linden. We'd curated a queer textiles show. So, yes, sometimes I do polish up that queerness into a little bubble. And we'd curated that. So I was staying on top of the Sawtooth socials, and that was pushed back due to COVID. So I'd been on the socials for ages. And my plan was to come to Lutruwita and live here for a few months and live in a camper van.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw this job pop up and I was like, I could do that. I'm doing that right now for free, really. I very much worked and did very similar roles at my volunteering. And I was like, I could get paid to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I applied for it. And then I told my friends I was moving to Tassie before I heard anything.
Oh, awesome.
I just knew.
Yeah.
I had that. Every now and then you get that magical gut feeling. And I was like, this is what I need to happen. So I'm manifesting it to the extreme and I'm telling everyone it's happening. Thank God I was right. But
yeah, so we're back to bravery again, and you're very decisive, is what I'm getting. So tell me, how does the day-to-day look for you at Sawtooth? What does the director of an ARI do?
Can't really refine it to a day-to-day. It does depend on week to week. We kind of work on a 6-week cycle. I think that's the best way to work it. So we have new shows open here approximately every 6 weeks. Recently we did have a show that only went for 2 weeks. That was just kind of our introduction to the year with Interweave Arts. But my day often is a lot of emails and a lot of meetings and talking to other people, which is my favourite thing to do. So that's helpful.
Is it really your favourite thing to do?
It is. I really like talking to other people.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were being cynical about emails, but...
Oh, I hate emails.
Right.
I hate emails because it's a tone of voice that you can't quite... there's a dryness that some people send and I'm like, are they mad at me? They're not mad at me. They're actually just emailing me like a normal person.
Yeah.
But I like talking in person with people or on the phone.
Okay. And so what are you talking about generally? So it's... how does an ARI... keep going? How does it function? How does it finance itself? And so what are you doing in those communications to bring art in and then have people see that art? What is your role involved in that?
So a big part of my role is grant applications. So we are really fortunate at Sawtooth to be really well supported by Arts Tasmania as well as Creative Australia. And that is really unique to Sawtooth, not all ARIs. I have to make that really clear, I feel, because a lot of ARIs are purely volunteer run.
Yeah.
And every dollar that comes in goes straight back out. We are able to pay artists, which is really exciting. So a big part of my job is processing invoices and chasing up invoices and doing the money side of things, which is not something I'd really dealt with much prior to here. And now I kind of handle a budget that's upwards of $150,000, which is great because I get to put that numbers brain on again.
Yeah, of course. There you go. It came back round again.
Yeah, it came back around again. So, invoices, money, budgets, grant writing to get more money for different things, different projects, contacting artists, touching base with them. I really like to try and touch base with artists at least a couple of months out of their exhibition to know what they're planning, know what their tech needs are. I know that other ARIs would kind of send a handbook to artists.
Okay.
But I really try to make it more personal because at the end of the day, they are dealing with me when they come here and Lauren, my co-worker.
Yeah.
And if they get this giant catalogue of information, I'm not sure they're going to read that.
No.
But if I sit with them over Zoom or in person, I know what information they're taking in and what they're not.
Yeah.
And then it's, working on little side projects. We've worked recently with the City of Launceston ABCDE learning site. We work with the University of Tasmania on a vitrine project where I curate 2 vitrines, which are glass boxes on the 3rd level of the library there. So I really put a few days, I try and really designate into curating that and, thinking of artists who could work with this space because it's a really tricky space to work with.
You've been running some workshops.
Yep, running workshops. So we were lucky to have City of Launceston support us last year with a pilot program of workshops, which was maybe the most fun I've had doing a different type of program here at Sawtooth because that wasn't here Like we didn't really do that when I first joined, just because we were coming out of COVID, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And getting people back into the space has really been kind of a tricky thing, particularly because we also moved buildings just as COVID hit.
Okay.
So we moved buildings, closed down, opened up weirdly, and it's only now that some people are coming back into the space. But at the same time, the numbers don't reflect that, which is really bizarre. You know, there are people like, oh, I haven't been to you since you're in Scimitar Street. I go, well, that's interesting because we get about double the amount of people we had at Scimitar Street. Vaguely speaking figures, that's not necessarily
No, sure. But
accurate.
But yeah, it's so, yeah, I suppose with your numbers head on, you know, I mean, how do you keep track of everything? You seem to have a workflow, a process. Is that something that you just keep in your brain? Where does it come from? Does it come from experience, having worked in ARIs before? Are you developing that as you go? Or do you have a rigid system that you follow?
I work on it as I go. I think learning to be responsive is a really important part of the way the ARI is run, I think. You can't have everything planned to a T. It doesn't work like that.
No.
Art doesn't work like that. So a lot of it is just hovering in my brain. Google Calendar. I am infamous for sending myself emails at 2:00 in the morning of things that pop into my brain that I need to do the next day because I forgot to do them that day, or I'm afraid I will forget to do them. And I'm working on it. Like, I know that's not the healthiest work pattern to be working with, but when you love something, when you love what you do, it's really hard to just put it down at the end of the day.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And I can't turn off my 2 a.m. shower thoughts that I have forgotten to send an email to someone. It's better than me sending the actual email.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it used to be me do the actual work and then schedule send. Now it's, send myself an email to remind myself when I'm back on working hours.
Okay, yeah.
Because you can't expect when things happen at ARIs, especially because we have a board of volunteers. You know, they're not going to respond to your email in the middle of the day when they're at work.
No.
They're going to respond when they're back home from work. So that's when I get my board responses. The same goes for artists. They also have jobs a lot of the time, and they're not going to respond to me.
No, and likewise, when they do respond, it might not necessarily be on your working day or on your schedule. So you're working asynchronously quite a lot, I guess.
Yeah.
So you're always thinking ahead, trying to. You need to pull something together by a certain date to get shows on. Working with Lauren, who's working on the marketing, and just lining everything, getting rubber ducks, getting little ducks in line.
Yes.
Okay. What would you say in that process would be, say, the key challenges you face? Would there be sort of 3 challenges you reckon that you face here at Sawtooth? What is it about an ARI specifically, or is it something that would apply in all arts organisations and institutions?
I think we kind of touched on a bit turning off at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's an arts issue. I think it's a capitalism issue maybe.
Yep.
But turning off at the end of the day is really hard. And I don't know if I ever do fully turn off sometimes. Another challenge is making sure you curate for the audience that is experiencing your space.
Yeah.
And that really differs in ARI to ARI. I just think about the difference between the 3 ARIs I've been most heavily involved with, Bus, Trocadero and Sawtooth. We have 3 very different audiences, and you have to learn how to curate that towards your target audience, as well as curate something that will appeal to non-artists, which is a unique issue to Sawtooth. Not issue, challenge.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our audience are not artists.
Yeah.
And I love that. And that's part of my pride and joy here, is that, we have people who aren't artists come through on the regular.
Yeah.
And you would not find that in a lot of ARIs on the mainland, I would say.
Okay.
But that's also a challenge, is how do we also get these audiences in here, which is not necessarily something I've had to think about before.
No, okay.
And my last challenge would be making time for my own creative practice when my entire work life is creative practice as well.
Yeah, sure. So is that, so you talked about, again, so we're back to time in terms of, switching off or you're activating at 2 a.m.,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff, So yeah, how do you bridge that intersection between, your own practice? How do you distinguish between them? How do you make time for your own practice these days?
I don't,
Okay.
put simply. If there is an outcome that I can aim towards, I might do it. Like I had a great idea at the beginning of the year that I was going to apply for every arts competition that I could, because that's like an easy outcome base.
Yeah.
Respond to the prompt, apply. I did one, which is better than none.
Yeah.
And it's because I'm kind of itching at what that prize stands for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
like I'm
understand
also like to challenge the institutions themselves. How cliche. But I'm working on it. Definitely working on it. I bought a new camera.
Oh, wow.
So I've actually been taking photos again.
Oh, fantastic.
So maybe I'm just going back to the beginning to try and get back into it somehow as well.
Yeah.
And, I've taken 2-3 rolls of film this year, which for me, that's a lot
Yeah, sure.
already when we're not that deep into the year yet.
Well, no, that's like one every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Have you processed them?
Lost one of them. And then one got processed. Not the other one's not finished yet. It's got like a photo left.
Yeah, right.
Haven't found the photo yet.
Okay. Well, that sounds really positive. Like, so yeah, I suppose you're almost 3 years here, and something when you were talking about all the funding that you have, and it's absolute awesome success. A lot can be attributed to you and your tenure here. Is my understanding. You've done a lot of work. You said a lot of your time is spent on funding applications, and so perhaps having put in that groundwork with Sawtooth, perhaps would you foresee yourself being able to make more time and space for your own practice now?
Yeah. Hopefully. New year, new me.
Yeah.
Still living that idea.
Mm-hmm.
As well as, I'm still hopeful. It's the early of the year. We'll see again when it's winter. But I feel like I always do the classic thing that a lot of people do, which is new year, new me. I'm going to make all the art. I'm going to make it happen. And, I'm talking, one of my dear friends, we often talk about art ideas. And, last night I curated a show. It sounds great in my head. Haven't written any of it down.
Sure.
But I'm actually having ideas again. I got really ill at the beginning of last year, and I think that also put a massive impact on my ability to create.
Yeah, because I suppose what you've touched on is the importance of understanding ourselves, our health and our well-being, how as artists, as arts workers, it's so important to understand our relationship with time, with the space, with and how that affects us. How those 2 a.m. email reminders to ourselves, whilst they're really great for keeping the work flowing, how is that actually impacting on your own practice, your own well-being? And I love a book called Atomic Habits. When you were speaking before, I was just thinking about, just changing a couple of things in what you do, buying a new camera and putting a few rolls through it. And then also accepting that actually, I've shot almost 3 roles this year, and that's a win.
Yeah.
That's a win. So I suppose to begin to sort of draw some conclusions on everything. I mean, thank you for sharing so much, Zara. Where you're at now in your practice and your work as a director of an ARI, I suppose what would be the things you've learned that if our listeners were wanting to explore their own practice and their own career in the arts, what are the things that you've learned along the way that they might benefit from?
If you want to be like a fully practicing artist, maybe having a job in the arts is actually not the answer for you.
Right.
And I know that sounds kind of disheartening sometimes, but a lot of my mates who are still making are the ones who don't work in the arts.
No.
And also, sometimes your creative practice might not be physical. Like I am actually still practicing a lot. I have a lot of notes on my phone.
Yeah.
I have a lot of ideas. They just might not have physically come out yet, and that doesn't disregard them as any less valid just because I haven't made them yet or anything. And I think, it's okay to write ideas down and not action them straight away. Like sometimes sitting in your studio is just sitting there and thinking.
Yes.
And that's hard to do.
Yeah, and I think that is what is underappreciated in society today is we live in a time-compressed, busy world. Mm-hmm. And so making and having time to sit and think and to feel, I think also, I sort of, I'm really interested in how embodied an arts practice can be and how embodied working can be, so mm-hmm. sitting behind a desk all day and then going home and expecting yourself to just knock out a painting, that's not going to happen. But if you can make the time to sit in your studio or to wander around your studio and ponder, that's making art, right?
Yeah. And studio doesn't necessarily mean like a little white box that you can paint in. Like my studio is my kitchen table, which is also my housemate's drag station and my other housemate's studio as well, Studio doesn't have to be a physical space. It's a mindset. Yeah,
a few years ago I did the Tales of Precarity project and when I was setting up the interviews with artists, I basically saying, let's meet in a space where you're comfortable, your studio or wherever. And not one of the artists actually took me to a studio per se. There was kitchen tables, there was a storeroom, there was a local cafe. Yeah, it's so the notion of having those studio spaces, a loft apartment in the Bowery in New York City. It's all part of the mythology. They are very real spaces that some wonderful artists have made some wonderful things in. But for many of us, perhaps the space in which we work is, as you say, it doesn't have to be so physically manifested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I feel compelled that I need to say
Please.
as well is that I also want to acknowledge what a privilege it is to work in the arts. I was handed those right cards and I am so privileged to be where I am. And a lot of other people won't get that privilege. And I'm lucky that I have supportive parents. I grew up in a stable place. I grew up where when I told my parents I was quitting mathematics to do arts, they supported it. And I was able to volunteer a lot of my time because I could pay rent other ways. I was sorted there and I sacrificed and I moved back in with my parents when I went to art school. But I had that as an opportunity.
Yeah. And
I think it's such a privilege that I am where I am today. And I don't want people to think that, oh, poor me, I really, really struggle. I get to follow my dreams and my passions in ways that a lot of other people don't. And I'm also at a stage where I'm financially stable in doing that.
Yeah.
And that's huge.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really awesome. Yeah, because you did say before, if you want to pursue your practice, don't work in the arts. So I was going to ask you, if you weren't working in the arts, where would you be working? But I think it perhaps more fittingly is you're loving what you're doing so much. I'm just getting this energy from you. It's sort of, what next? Where do you go from here? Or are you happy where you are?
Oh, I ask myself, this is maybe also why my creative practice has been on pause, is I've been asking myself this a lot lately. I don't know what's next. I have like 20 ideas of what could be next. The other week I was considering becoming an accountant. Don't think that's probably what's next for me, but I was considering it for a moment because I would love stability and to own a house one day.
Yes.
But I don't think that'll be happening anytime soon. I don't know what's next. I would really love to delve into research and academia, because I find academia is really inaccessible to the people who it's for sometimes. And I want to be part of that change that I'm seeing people like you and so many other people out there who are kind of challenging this institutional idea of who academics are for. So that's maybe where I'll be going, but ask me tomorrow and I will be opening a cafe with my boyfriend in a tiny beach town. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. I've got one last question for you.
Yeah.
In one word, why Tasmania? What's so special about it?
One word?
More if you wish. It's difficult on purpose.
I'm going to give it the 3 Ps. Pace, people, and place. The physicality, the beauty of this island. I went driving around the north coast, or not northern part of Latrobe yesterday, and it's like, wow, I live here. Like, whoa. And the people, I really did not expect to find a queer family when I moved here.
Yeah.
And the pace. I mean, I still do have mainland to brain on a bit, where you've got to run. But there is definitely a different pace here, and I love it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Zara.
Thank you, Tim. Great to chat.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Connect, Curate, Create. I hope you found inspiration and insights that you can apply to your own creative work. For highlights and links, check out the show notes, and be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast player so you never miss an episode. Tune in next time as I continue to explore life and work in the arts.